Hello, everyone. Welcome. We hope you're having a good week. It's going to take just a couple of moments for people to load up and enter into this session. We've opened it just a couple of minutes before noon Eastern time, so that you can go ahead and be joining the session that we're very excited for presenting you here today. So for the next couple of minutes, we'll allow people to enter into the session. Then, as always, we'll do our very brief introductions, and then we'll get with the presentation underway. So sit tight for just a moment because we're about to get started with this presentation about cybersecurity trends and topics, recapping events from 2021, and discussing predictions for 2022. So you're in the right place. If this is the presentation that you're looking for, of course, the ISACA South Florida presentation, and whether you're joining us live or whether you'll see this on the recording afterwards, we're thrilled to have you on January 26th, 2022. I'm Rob Valdez, and I'm currently volunteering as the chapter president, and I'll do some additional introductions in just a moment as people actually hop in so that we get the introductions with people actually on the line. So it's about 12 right now, and we know that it takes just a minute for these sessions to load up full of people. So we'll be going ahead and getting started with some of the introductions and introductory materials right now. That way we can actually get into the fun part of the presentation that you're looking for. So welcome everyone to ISACA South Florida's presentation of cybersecurity trends, recapping events of 2021 and discussing predictions for 2022. You are in the right place, and we'll be getting started now. My name is Rob Valdez, and like I mentioned just a second ago, I'm currently serving as chapter president. Also on the line, we have Ryan Barras, who is the director of programming for ISACA South Florida. And Ryan, as always, has been critical for getting this event planned. And then in just a moment, I'll be introducing the guest of honor for today's presentation, Ed Cabrera. So welcome to this presentation. We're doing the brief introductions right now. The presentation will be approximately 45 minutes. So don't forget that at the end, you can certainly ask questions, and you can put those in the Q&A module so that we can attend to them. You can also put them in the chat, whichever is easiest for you, but the Q&A module is probably the easiest way for us to keep track. That way we don't have to scroll back up through the chat. Those questions, Ed can either address during the presentation or at the end. Probably at the end is more convenient, so we'll make sure to queue those up and have those ready for him. And then, of course, as always, the CPE certificates will be sent out after this presentation within approximately a week, give or take. As a reminder, this is a Zoom session, so the best way to participate in this session is to use the Zoom client that's downloaded into the workstation or the app on your mobile device. An alternative would be to load this session in the browser, and you can hopefully still access the functionalities like the Q&A module with that type of setup. So let me go ahead and introduce the guest that we're all excited to hear for today, and that is Ed Cabrera, Chief Cybersecurity Officer at Trend Micro. And Ed has a long and decorated career where he's been responsible for analyzing emerging cyber threats and developing innovative and resilient enterprise risk management strategies for Fortune 500 clients and strategic partners. Before joining Trend Micro, Ed was a 20-year veteran and former CISO of the United States Secret Service, with experience leading information security, investigation and cyber events, and protective programs in support of the Secret Service integrated mission. Ed actually started his career working on cybercrime investigations against transnational criminal groups and targeted financial and retail sectors. He proudly served on the Presidential Protective Division for President George W. Bush before transitioning to the Secret Service Criminal Investigative Division. There, Ed led cyber forensic operations in support of Secret Service large-scale data breach investigations and served as the Secret Service advisor to the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center. So we're very thankful to have with us today Ed Cabrera. Please take it away, Ed.
Roberto, thank you very much. And Ryan, thank you so much. And thank everybody for joining today. See if I can share my deck real quick. Roberto, I almost feel bad because I thought it was more of a the shorter intro. I almost feel bad, but nonetheless, thank you so much. Very gracious on the intro. Want to welcome everybody today, and really, as Roberto was saying, is start this dialogue and this conversation. I don't like to have it so formal, so definitely with the questions and answers, or rather the questions and the discussions, really look forward to it. Possibly at the end is best, but if there is a pause and there is a time or opportunity, I might answer it, but I'll probably just do it towards the end. So what we did is put together some of the numbers that our threat research team does. And when I mean threat research team, we have at Trend Micro, we have over 450 threat and vulnerability researchers across the globe. And so it's really important for us to be able to not only do the job that we need to do to secure our customers, but it's also really this ongoing assessment, not only of us, our products, the threats and the vulnerabilities that are out there. So data is critical for us. And so having this data-driven approach is very important for us. Let me go to the next slide here. So what does that mean? For us, that means we have like 250 million sensors across the globe. And that sensors meaning products from on the personal side all the way up to enterprise. We have 2.5 trillion queries. What that means is all customers of ours have a panel or so, and if they have an alert and they want to then query the panel on our threats, it really just gives us a measure of how much our customers are actually looking into the hits or threats that they're seeing, depending on the product that they're seeing. And this number just went up by 20 billion. So 85 billion threats blocked. So I'll get into that. What does that mean? How is that broken down? And we'll do that from a 2021 perspective, but even some of the slides that go a little bit further back. So just to give you a comparison. And we do that with over 500,000 customers that we have, commercial customers worldwide. And so just that's really the scope and scale that we're dealing with when we talk about the data that we're bringing in. All the data is being brought in through data lakes, and these connected data lakes then we utilize our analytics on top of these data lakes to do the analysis that we need to do. So we call it our smart protection network. So by the numbers, we have, as I said, 85 billion that were blocked in 2021, and that's as of November 2021. Doesn't really include December, so that probably is obviously going to go up, possibly by another 10 billion or so. And it seems like that's the average month to month. So you could see here, 2016, we had 81 billion threats blocked. Threats are of all kinds and shapes and colors across all of our products. And so interesting to note is 2016 was also the peak of ransomware attacks that we were seeing out there. And so that's really the shift that we saw from 2015 to 16, where the locker variant types of ransomware that we were detecting and blocking shifted over to the crypto ransomware that we see today. And so that really aligns, I suspect, into the higher number in 2016. But as you can see, it starts to, so it It dropped in 2017, but then starts to pick up again. And obviously, as you could tell, month to month in 2021, the amount of threats blocked keeps continuing to go up. So other things that we sort of noticed on the bigger side in 2021 was there was over 770 vulnerabilities that were disclosed, discovered, not only in the wild, but also through our zero-day initiative. When I meant that we have 450 threat researchers and vulnerability researchers, we also have another 3,000 researchers that are not Trend Micro researchers. They're independent researchers that participate in the zero-day initiative bug bounty program. And so we're able to leverage all of that research and that bug bounty program to obviously improve the products that we have, to identify filters and so forth that we can deploy in our products even before public disclosure happens. So 66 zero days were found in 2021. And then we also noticed that there was this increased sort of disturbing trend. So it's an increase from vulnerability disclosure to weaponization or to exploit being found in the wild, right? So I call it this time to exploit. Usually in the past 30 days or longer between a disclosure and an exploit has been developed. Over time, over the last few years, that has begun shorter and shorter. Now we're seeing the weaponization of vulnerabilities that are disclosed within hours, if not days, of being seen in the wild or disclosed. And that also means from a proof of concept from researcher perspective and or from vulnerabilities that are disclosed independently. So what does that mean is that we're saying this challenging for customers on this patch gap. In other words, the time they have to, our customers have to then, move into this timing aspect. So they have to speed up their patching cycles, what I mean, and close that patch gap. And so that's one of the things that we saw in 2021 that was really concerning. So I figured part of the questions that we always get is COVID-19, what is the impact? What have we seen? And so here, similar, here is COVID-19 by month, and this really covers email, URL, and file hits and blocks. And so you could see here, there was a peak back in May, but on average, it's been steady and then almost declining. I would suspect, obviously, as the pandemic still becomes more possibly an endemic, then I will see, we probably suspect that will see the same thing happening when it comes through COVID-related attacks. And again, that could be a malicious email, malicious URL, or file. And that's how we categorize them. And here it's broken down. ERS is our email reputation system, and then WRS is our web reputation system, and then the file reputation system. So you can see how it's broken down differently. You can see obviously email is still predominant when we talk about primary vectors to attack organizations, right? Doing the phishing, spear phishing, and whaling attacks still seems to be that primary vector. So some more numbers here. Again, by comparison, you see a peak in 2016, and then you see a dip and then an increase. And then obviously in 2021, we see month by month an incremental increase when it comes to email attacks. And you could see, again, like I said earlier, there was about 64 billion malicious emails blocked, and that's out of the 85 billion. And so here on the web side, same thing here. You see this incremental increase, but even from a 2016 to what we were talking about now, there is a significant increase in web side attacks. And so you're here at 4 billion, where we actually have the amount of webmail or web-based attacks blocked. And that means malicious URLs, malicious links, and so forth. File types, interesting here. I just wanted to throw this in there, how different spamming and phishing campaigns changes sort of the landscape significantly, right? So it's really campaign driven, and that's where we really shifted our threat research side more on the campaign side rather than really specifically on we still track malware families, and I'll show you in a minute. We still track things, but I think the comprehensive campaign analysis is pretty much more of the value add that we can do for ourselves, but also for our customers. But you can see here, within a month, there was an actual completely 180 degree shift when it comes to PDFs and Word docs being the primary spam attachments. Here, and forgive me, this is one of the slides that I got updated here just a few minutes ago, and I think I just got the wrong resolution one uploaded to this deck. But you could pretty much see what the trend is here. Business email compromises had been plateauing in 2020, and we really didn't see any real spikes. But now what we've seen in 2021 is this significant increase in business email compromise attacks. And what does that mean? So business email compromises take different flavors. Here, there's a comparison of a CEO fraud, and then here in blue is just the overall trend. The CEO fraud, when it comes to business email compromises, is essentially a social engineered attack where attackers do primarily their amount of research on the front end and the reconnaissance phase. They usually don't attach a malicious link or file. Their whole job is to then create a ruse and trick, say, financial directors, CFOs, into transferring money maliciously overseas and so forth. And so business email compromises are essentially, confidence games or scams, right? So where they're just doing it vis-a-vis email. And what do? They really focus on doing their research, and it's easy now, right? With the vast amounts of social media exposure that our executives are out there promoting the company, they're promoting themselves. All of this, information is out there to be, farmed, collected, and analyzed, and then used against organizations for these business email compromises. So that's the individual, but then the overall, you also have invoice fraud or invoice business email compromise, invoice-based attacks, where now they're, instead of impersonating, individuals in a communication chain, now they're impersonating possibly vendors within communicating with victim companies to either impersonate an existing vendor and or create the idea that they are a legitimate existing vendor. So how do they do this with some success? Obviously, we are all prone to be able to trust, and we want to trust. Unfortunately, a lot of it could be stopped or thwarted with not just security controls. We have our machine learning fingerprinting capability to be able to sort of map communications for executives and so forth. But the simple controls are really, having secondary voice confirmations for any request to transfer money and so forth. All of this is very, sadly enough, simple to mitigate, but unfortunately, you see everything is going up. And we'll talk about predictions and about where I think where this is going. And you can imagine with the whole notion of deep fakes, and now deep fakes, not just with photos, but more so now with audio files as well. So that I thought was very interesting, showing that I think we're going to see in 2022 a larger increase in business email compromise attacks. So malware threats, families, this is sort of a distribution across different sectors. And again, not so much surprising. We track this by families and, manufacturing, government, healthcare, and education. Healthcare and education sort of flip-flopped, from October to November last year. But for the most part, that stays consistent. Malware campaigns, as I mentioned, is just more of an aggregate. And here we see a slight shift. You have technology up there in October and it's really not here in November. So there is outliers that pop up, but it's interesting to see the amount of campaigns that are happening out there, right? Government alone in November, 179. And I'm sure with Log4j in December, that would have sort of peaked as well on the government side too. So here, this is one of the nice slides. Again, forgive me for the blurring, is the other one of the updated graphs I wanted to include. So when we're talking about the malware campaigns, trending analysis is very important for us, right? And we're often asked, and just recently in an interview I was asked on the effect of, say, law enforcement actions or takedowns, on, you name the cyber criminal activity. And I mentioned that it does definitely have an impact. However, just like here, this is a perfect example. It shows that when Emotet was targeted, infrastructure was taken down at the beginning of the year, you see a drop off of Emotet activity. But it still stays constant and there's still activity continuing. And now towards the end of last year, now this includes December, we see a huge uptick of Emotet. And so what does that mean? Well, Emotet, or TrickBot, and Ryuk all really constituted a large campaign from a ransomware perspective that was incredibly, I would say, impactful, right? So it wasn't really necessarily volumetric. In other words, it wasn't like huge amounts of attacks, but when they came together and the campaigns that when they were brought together, you could see even here that TrickBot and Ryuk being the amount of seeing or blocked at the same, almost at the same rate here at the lower half here. And so interesting thing is Emotet is that first part of that attack chain where they use Emotet to create the backdoor and then be able to drop TrickBot, and then obviously Ryuk, possibly one of the last pieces of malware that's dropped, because we'll get into it. And what we've really seen when it comes to the ransomware types of attacks is this double extortion. So we have some numbers here to go into it right now. So this just goes back to sort of a distribution between enterprise and SMB on Emotet. And you could see here, November is what is in orange. So you see the uptick of Emotet, but this gradual increase that happened from October to November. So this slide, very important to me. I thought it was interesting to show we excluded WannaCry. And so you ask yourself, why are we excluding WannaCry? Well, WannaCry is because the Eternal Blue exploit is essentially, out in the wild, propagating itself based on, vulnerable SMB version 1 systems, right? So it's constantly still propagating, so it's still out there. So taking that sort of noise out, we really wanted to exclude on get a picture of what we're seeing from a trending analysis when it comes to ransomware. And you could see that there's trending upwards, there's certain dips, and then there's a peak in November, and then it drops down, and you could see that this only goes to November, that we see a slight uptick and possibly trend maybe in December to start upticking even more. And so I suspect with Emotet upticking, I would suspect that we'll see ransomware start to uptick as well for 2022. And I guess one thing to say here is, it's not to say The big difference is, I think when we think of ransomware, we think of these campaigns and attacks that we think volumetric, right? More is bad and less is good, absolutely on a whole. But what we've seen is this evolution of these ransomware as a service providers. And we get into this double extortion technique where they're doing much more or much less, or the volume is less, but the actual impact of these ransomware and double extortion attacks, the impact is higher. So it's hard to show in a graph like this, but the impact definitely, and you can't like not watch the news on a daily basis and not see that effect, right? So ransomware families by industries, again, it's sort of a data point just to show, but again, it's healthcare, government, and interesting here, you have insurance in November. So not large numbers, so not a large data set. And obviously this doesn't make a trend. A 2-month, snapshot does not make a trend, we all know. So that's where we tried to sort of zoom out and identify certain trends in certain areas that we can say, hey, this campaign or this malware family is obviously, there's an uptick in activity and there's an uptick in a certain sector. So here the slides just capturing what I was saying earlier. This is our XDR panel that we're seeing up here. But essentially, ransomware is here to stay. But again, what we're seeing is a much more sophisticated, pivot, right? And again, this is post-breach ransomware attacks that we're seeing, where we're seeing a lot more ransomware being delivered. Again, the double extortion side of the house, post-breach and post-exfiltration. And so I didn't explain then the double extortion attack, meaning that companies and organizations are targeted, then their data is exfiltrated, but then the data that remains, in other words, copies of the data are exfiltrated, then the data that remains is then encrypted, right? So obviously it's, hey, if you don't pay the ransom, then not only you're not going to get the key to decrypt, we're going to also dox you and send out all the sensitive information about your organization, right? So the other piece here is that we see an uptick from a cryptocurrency mining. So TrickBot has become very modular. So it'll drop Ryuk as a ransomware. It could drop crypto mining malware, all of which it's like the Swiss Army knife of of these types of malware families. And so when you look at it, that's where the problem comes in. It's like they have not only once that they're in, can they steal your data and monetize that data if possible? It's that, hey, if you don't pay us from an extortion perspective, now we'll just drop crypto mining malware on there as well. So in 2021, attacking the supply chain, right? We talk about SolarWinds and the impact of SolarWinds. I think what ends up happening is for obvious reasons, right? As the attackers' capabilities increase, I always talk about the cyber criminal underground, specifically the Russian-speaking cyber criminal undergrounds. It's the tide that lifts all boats, right? You have a very mature ecosystem in the Russian-speaking criminal undergrounds where you actually have crime as a service that operates. And so what does that mean? That means that not only are the capabilities and the sophistication increases, but also, areas of targets or targeting areas shifts. And obviously from a return on investment, hitting a supply chain where you can hit an MSSP where you not only you're just going to get one customer, now you can get all the MSSP's customers, right? And so this is the type of sort of shift in methodology in TTPs that they're also want the maximum return on investment on their attacks. And so supply chain gets them that, right? That gets them the ability to pivot. into so many other companies or organizations that might be as vulnerable, vis-a-vis or i.e. as SolarWinds. Here we have the espionage general shift with solar compromise. You have Sunburst, SolarGate, Mobilium versus ransomware with Casilla, VSA, supply chain attack. And so all of this, as you could see, is one of these things that ransomware or digital extortion schemes are, a tool of choice. And it's now we're actually seeing it from either hacktivist point of view. I don't have a slide here, but just recently there was reporting that Belarus rail line was attacked, and they were then being extorted to be able to release some political prisoners. But the point is that obviously these are just additional tools in the tool chest, be it for hacktivists, cyber criminals, or even nation state actors. And when we talk about blurred lines, it is completely blurred when it comes to TTPs. Arguably, when you talk about state sponsored, they're only as sophisticated as they need to be to conduct the operation that they want to. So what does that mean? That means that it means them living off the land, right? Utilizing or abusing, tools on a network. So not just malware or malicious code, but it's also, utilizing these web shell tools to be able to then leverage and go deeper within an organization. So here, when we talk about new ransomware families, we track that here. You could see the hit list of all these ransomware families. And just to be clear, on the actual graph, it's just new families that are detected each month, right? So back in March, there was a spike, 10 new families were detected, but then back sort of a trickle back to November, only 2 new families were detected. Doesn't mean much other than that they only have to innovate or iterate, as they need to, right? So in other words, if there is a takedown, if there are certain ransomware families that are compromised and they're, the good guys are able to decrypt or develop tools to decrypt the data, then obviously they're going to pivot, right? And so they need to create new ransomware families. So the double extortion ransomware families here, you basically have the list, but obviously you could see all of them, as of March of 2021, and you have Ryuk in here, you have a lot of, you have Nephilim, excuse me, Conti, you have, there's a lot of names down here that are unfortunately familiar to probably you guys and or security teams around the world. So financial threats, what does that mean? So banking Trojans. So what are we seeing? So banking malware, for the most part, October to November, we saw Remnant as being the top one. But I just wanted to show in here that even Emotet down at the bottom, even though it was, sort of here, it's on the uptick. If you remember the last slide that I showed where Emotet started to peak from October through December. So you can see the uptick on Emotet. Banking malware industries, again, this just goes to show you that banking Trojans are not just attacking the financial sector. You see here that it runs the gamut: technology, government, manufacturing, and then obviously retail and so forth. POS malware, again, you see a lot of the usual suspects, Alina and Lock POS there as well. Again, these, you think, well, because of the chip and pin situation, are these POS malware even, effective anymore? But again, utilizing and going after web-based shopping carts, like we saw with recent attacks in the retail industry, online retail industry. This is where the focus is where anything that they can actually monetize, they'll continue to do. So there's things that you would think trending downwards, yet it's still active and attacks continue. Again, this is global as well. And so what does this mean for cyber threats, from a landscape perspective in 2022 and beyond? Well, I think the polarization and misinformation, I think what we see is an incredible increase in the amount of, you could say, propaganda or types of attacks or campaigns. You have enabled deep fakes. All this creates opportunities, right? From not only malicious activity from a disruptive perspective, be it associated with campaigns, but this is going to be the tools of choice going forward. So we do a lot of research, and one of the groups we focused in on is APT28 or PwnStorm. And what was interesting is that we were watching them from 2014, but they were the group, Russian-backed group that was that really shifted from a traditional cyber espionage to cyber propaganda, right, in 2016 for the election. And then they've been going strong ever since. And this idea of creating any kind of doubt in the information that you're possibly getting is a fantastic goal when it comes from a state-sponsored perspective. It's not necessarily for financial gain, which obviously deepfakes can be, as we were talking about earlier, can lead to, especially on the audio side. But what we're also seeing is when you talk about just that we tend to start second guessing, and we see it now, and we're incredibly polarized as a country politically, and so all of this creates great opportunities for those who want to increase that that division. So we'll definitely be seeing that continue and go forward as one of the things that we're predicting. Digital identities, the new security control and perimeter, emergence of new technologies to support regulations. I think right now what we're going to see is this demand for updating our identification, authentication side of the house. Right? Obviously, we talk about this and associated with zero trust, and how zero trust is when it comes from an architectural perspective, it's not just a buzzword. I think it's one of those things that it's a repackage possibly. Some people talk about marketing terms, but as far as zero trust and architecture perspective, I think that's a security concept that's always been there, right? We always talk about least privilege and role-based access controls and so forth, and segmenting your networks. I think here from a digital identity perspective, I think that's going to be sort of revamped, and we're going to see changes here, not only in the attacks, but also changes from a technology perspective, and improving that authentication piece and moving to that zero trust, or utilizing tools and infrastructure and architecture for the zero trust. Critical infrastructure, extreme digital technologies and adoptions may spawn possible attacks on critical infrastructure. So critical infrastructure for the longest time has maintained, unfortunately, this security through obscurity model, and they really banked on this whole notion of air-gapped systems, properly segmented, but we know the convergence of IT and OT is very real, and the challenges that we have with that means that these critical infrastructure sectors, whereas did not have elements of real-time support or remote support and or real-time data being, real-time data requirements on the enterprise side for, say, SCADA systems and control systems. So it's this evolution that really has created the bigger problem, is the convergence of IT and OT. And so all that does is creates a higher risk and a higher footprint, right? And higher attack surface that we're going to be seeing. Also, we're seeing and predicting because of it is industrial IoT, right? And what does that mean? It's just Internet of Things and devices that traditionally have been obviously off the shelf and commercial, but been on the consumer side. But now we're seeing that being adopted in automated building management systems associated with HVAC, power, elevators, other systems. And so obviously once you introduce the commercial off-the-shelf systems and integrate them into, say, a smart factory or control system environment, obviously you're introducing that risk and problems. And I think, the prediction there is that's going to continue to happen, right? That's going to continue to create problems for organizations and critical infrastructure owner operators. This is as healthcare begins to recuperate from the pandemic, securing acquired digital assets becomes prime security concern. Healthcare will carry a significant burden of data protection as they amassed collective data intel after the pandemic. So COVID-related risk is not just limited to obviously the numbers I talked about earlier, which is social engineered attacks utilizing or leveraging COVID. Obviously, going forward, what did healthcare do, generally speaking, from a public health perspective? What databases that have been created around testing? What databases have been created around vaccinations? What databases that have been created and systems that weren't connected now were connected because of the pandemic to speed response, to have better numbers and accuracy at hospitals and so forth. So this is going to, have that sort of hangover effect when it comes to the pandemic and the healthcare. And so what we don't see is this interdependency problem from these disparate systems that were either didn't exist before the pandemic and or existed, but never communicated with each other. So that's going to be a risk. Digital supply chain will be vulnerable as online processes and services will be tightly interconnected. While attempts to return to pre-pandemic lifestyle will be underway, it can be expected that many online services will continue to thrive. So essentially, all of this is, as I just mentioned, is the interconnectedness and interdependency, which creates complexity, which then creates risk, right? So all of this is, we know, is a challenge for organizations, right? How are we doing and what are we doing to mitigate risk? And so obviously the more systems we have, more complex systems that we have associated around the pandemic and healthcare, and then, but also with everything that we're doing now, automation is king. And so what is automation? What you need with automation is obviously, a robust API system. And so what does that mean, API systems? Then again, this interconnected systems, applications, and operating systems. Now we're looking at, okay, if we're talking about supply chain, if I compromise X application or operating system that is being utilized, vis-a-vis, i.e. rather SolarWinds, then, then where can I pivot, from there? So definitely a problem. So scrutinizing tactics instead of threat actors themselves will be one of the focal points for securing cybersecurity landscape. We've already seen it, right? Thanks to MITRE ATT&CK framework, we actually, adopted and evaluate our tools with MITRE, and then we also we really believe it from a cyber threat intelligence aspect to it, that being able to communicate beyond, say, the kill chain discussion, how can we really map and talk about indicators of compromise or indicators of attacks, but how they map to techniques and tactics, and how that then maps to groups and campaigns. So all of that is one of those things that I think it's an evolution that I think we're going to see it, and I think it's welcome. I think as we get into this concept of really focus on the campaign level, this is going to be very important. Need to establish tighter collaboration between organizations and third-party security vendors will be underlined, right? Again, this collaboration, I've always said that the criminal underground, they do much better at scaling trust than we do on the good side, right? I mean, for us to work with our vendors, government agencies, and our, our colleagues within our industry and our sector, the trust isn't always there, and we've really had this trust deficit. And so I think that is going to be more and more critical going forward, is that we need to be able to scale trust much better than they do, right? Or at least match them. And so I think we're making a lot of strides. I think there's been an evolution to cyber threat intelligence and information sharing. We've gone from, very let me say, ineffective list of IOCs with no context. Then we went to this machine to machine, be able to share information, but now we share so much information, even with context. Now it challenges not only the teams that are analyzing threat intelligence, but it's challenging the infrastructure, because you can have the best threat intelligence in the world, but if you can't, make it actionable, then there's no use in having, the threat intelligence to begin with. So ransomware will mutate into even more menacing threat as it continues to develop. I'm coming and I'm finishing up right now. This is one of my last slides. And again, ransomware, we talked about single extortion, where it started, double extortion, where we're at, triple extortion, including distributed denial of service attacks, and then even quadruple extortion, where direct communications with customers and stakeholders, right? Not only attacking you as an organization, but attacking your vendors, right? And threatening the actual organization, saying, if you do not pay us, then we'll continue to attack additional vendors and so forth, which becomes a huge challenge for organizations. So if you want to know anything about what we're doing on the research side, I'm a big proponent, as you could tell, love the research that we do. It's all data driven, and really recommend you guys going to our website and look at all the products, if you don't already look at them, to see what's going on out there from a threat perspective, and what information we can provide our customers, but even non-customers and everybody out there. So I think that is it. And I want to say thank you. A lot of information that I covered. I see a lot in the chat. Maybe we'll then, let me stop sharing and then go into that.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Ed. That's really fantastic data. When you first were talking about the number of researchers that Trim Micro has, I was a little surprised by the vast number of researchers. And then when you started getting into this data, I said, okay, yeah, I think I can see how it would take such an extraordinary team to put together really this quality and this volume of research. So thank you very much for sharing that. I want to actually ask just a couple of questions that came into the chat. I guess I'll start off kind of with that topic specifically. There were a number of people that asked if you'd be willing, if there's a version of the slides that you will be willing to share after the presentation. If so, we can make that available on our website.
Definitely. Let me just do one last pass, make sure I didn't leave anything in that I shouldn't have. But yeah, absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, and we appreciate the generosity. And I guess just to your point, the efforts for building trust among colleagues and professionals that we need to continue contributing towards. Here's a question that I'd like to pose to you. It came in to the chat. The question is, in the energy sector, what is the most critical risk you see and the best controls Do you know of any risk or control framework that you can recommend specific for the energy sector?
Well, I really think from an energy sector, the risk, obviously, Colonial Pipeline attack really drove it home as far as the vulnerable nature of the energy sector, right? And then how, what I sort of alluded to when I was talking about this convergence of IT and OT systems, right? How these systems now become much more interdependent. And so the threats that we see are probably going to obviously go up, right? What digital extortion does for criminal actors, even though the group behind it quickly realized that a lot of pain might be coming their way and sort of backpedaled and gave keys, and there was this discussion, did they pay or not pay? And so there was this whole notion that I think the threat actors starting to realize they have, depending on who they can really attack with, and get paid, and who's really going to bring down a lot of pain onto them. And so that aside, obviously they become a huge target, energy sector, because of the fact that, again, this convergent system. So when I think of frameworks, I think of frameworks, which is obviously the CIS 20, but I think when we get into a broader adoption, and I think the NIST cybersecurity framework. The reason why I like the NIST cybersecurity framework, because it rolls up multiple standards, right? And then maps it to 5 categories, right? And categories that are easy to digest at the board level, right? It's, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, right? These are really the main categories that when you're talking the technical controls, but trying to communicate that across, an organization that might not be really too, read up on cyber or cyber risk. I just think the adoption of this cybersecurity framework is key because, again, there is also different levels, and they're constantly adopting in the cybersecurity framework, and then are also adopting it for smaller size. They have a framework or a subset of the controls really to apply for small businesses, right? Because that's the other thing too. We get to talk about the energy sector, we can talk about any sector, but then there's a stratus of, large enterprises, mid-level, and then small businesses. And when you talk about the risk that they face, unfortunately, small and mid-sized companies across whatever sector are much more, much more impacted, right? They're much more exposed because they don't have the resources and the ability to, do the security right, but also maintain a mature program that matches to the risks that they face. So that's the other reason why I like the NIST cybersecurity framework, because it's not really posed as that way, but it's a maturity model where you are able to then assess yourself. I think it's 4 categories, and depending on the sector that you're in, then you can rate yourself. Am I a 1 or 2? And hey, depending on the sector I'm in, am I good to go? Or am I 1 or 2 and I should be a 4, right? And be it financial sector or anything else like that. So I just like the NIST cybersecurity framework.
And do you feel that, based on what we're currently saying, do you think that ultimately, these breaches may lead to additional regulation, government regulation and intervention? Because when you think about it, critical infrastructure aside, for the most part, when it comes to cybersecurity, private enterprise is self-regulated, following the frameworks, following the standards. But if we see 1 or 2 more large, infrastructure breaches or breaches that have, a significant magnitude of impact on the general population, do you think that something like that may end up leading to more intervention?
Yeah, I mean, I really do. So, perfect example. I was fortunate enough to be a really small player when they were creating this cybersecurity framework, as they, reached out to us when I was in the Secret Service to then help contribute, right, the development of it. and give our input, so to speak. And what's nice about it, and I didn't say about the NIST cybersecurity framework, it's also not only multiple standards bodies, standards, but it's also, when it was being created, they did this public-private, consortium to develop it. So that's one thing. But back to what you're saying, interesting enough about the framework, where when it came out, the federal government wasn't mandated. When I was with the Secret Service, we weren't mandated, which was sort of weird, that we weren't mandated to adopt the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? But it was I think Trump in his first year, I think, ended up mandating all federal, right, agencies adopt the NIST cybersecurity framework. So I suspect something like that, vis-a-vis either an executive order. I almost thought it was going to happen, but I think if there was another attack, like you said, I think it just didn't bring energy that direction. I think there's enough momentum and concern around, say, the energy sector because of the Colonial Pipeline, but I think it sort of came up short. TSA came out, right, because at the time, they were the leading regulatory body, or I'm saying, to impose, further restrictions on the pipelines. But the question is, going forward, I think there's a bill now to create another body to be able to be in charge from an energy sector perspective on that side of the house. But I think it's coming. Do I think, in my opinion, is that the only solution? Absolutely not, right? I mean, I think when it comes to everything that we do from a compliance perspective, that's a starting point, right? To me, I think that, compliance is, hey, this is the bottom. This is where we need to be at minimum, right? And so I think mandating certain sectors move to compliance like that. I mean, financial sector has already been moving that way. It's almost like automatic per se when it comes to it, but they're so highly regulated to begin with. But even the regulatory bodies affecting financial sector have strengthened, the requirements around cyber as well. So healthcare, same thing. Healthcare, I remember when you didn't even, from a ransomware attack, since there was this gray area, since there was, at the time, this was the single extortion model, where nothing was taken, nothing was exfiltrated, but yet, the data was just encrypted, and then there was this wiggle room. Well, no data was exfiltrated, so therefore there's no data breach notification that I have to do. And then HIPAA, decided to say, no, regardless of what the data is, if you've been attacked by from a ransomware attack, you have to make notifications and so forth. So I think all of that stuff is coming into play, and it's going to change anything. I'm wary, and I always like to pump the brakes to think that, hey, that is the answer. I think it's just a starting point, right?
Well, along those same lines, a lot of times when we look at risk-based industries, a strong indicator of what's to come is what are the insurance rates doing? And so you see, following your trends, are you seeing similar forecasting in our insurance premiums, and what does that look like?
Great question. And Lexi and I were just talking about this when it comes to the cyber insurance. Yeah, when the challenge here with the cyber insurance is two things. Interesting trends that have been happening, right? So obviously, policies at first weren't that very usual. Now there's cyber insurance, or then it moved to, yes, now you can get cyber insurance policies. Then it was, okay, how do you prove, or how do you mitigate? Like, we had one customer actually had to break down his security stack with his insurance provider, and we were in it, but to be able to show, hey, this is how I minimize risk. And he was able to then reduce his insurance premium. But I think what has really shown us is that now, similar to what I live in Florida, and only now are insurance companies starting to, after like a big break, because they pulled out of doing homeowners insurance policies in the state of Florida because of the hurricanes. It was too much of a risk, too many storms. And so insurance companies said, well, we can't do policies. And so I have a feeling similarly that we're going to get to that point with insurance companies, that either you're going to have to pay an incredible high premium, or you're not going to be able to get insurance, right? And so all of this stuff has huge like impact, because I mean, that's one of your, ways of, transferring that risk is obviously through insurance policies. And so I think the challenge going forward is, how do insurance companies measure that risk? And we talk about continuous monitoring and mitigation, and truly, having a better understanding, even from a compliance and from a security perspective of an organization's risk exposure. So how is that really more real time, and how can organizations, one example I like to talk about is like, when it was really shocking when I believe might have been Progressive or whatever the insurance carriers, the little fobs for the cars, right? You put it into the car and you can reduce your premium because they're getting real-time analytics of your speed, your braking, whether you have an accident, not accident, it's all being captured by this this module. And so are we getting there with the insurance companies? And I would say we're almost getting there. And the insurance companies right now, from a cybersecurity perspective, is an interesting relationship. Now, from an incident response, this is the reactive piece. This is not the proactive piece that we're discussing, more on the reactive. Now you're seeing, just like in healthcare, you have insurance panels, right? And so for incident response companies, they have to become members of these insurance panels so they can be approved incident response companies that can be external incident response companies after a breach that the insurance company is saying you can use, right? Or if you use an incident response company that is not on the pre-approved panel list, then you might have to pay more money or this or that and the other. So this whole panel, in network, out of network, which we all know that from a healthcare perspective, almost is what's happening with the cyber side. So the question is, are we going to see that on the monitoring side? Are we going to see that to where our companies and organizations say, hey, yeah, put that little fob in my, my network tap and be able to monitor, my network traffic and or my vulnerabilities, whatever the case may be. It's going to be interesting where this goes, because I think they're going to have a huge lever of the security industry on, be it, what are we doing as in the cybersecurity industry, but what our companies, or what can companies do and organizations do to minimize risk, but also for them to get affordable insurance. So that's a long answer. Sorry.
Well, no, it's great. Ed, thank you very much for the timely input. Really fantastic discussion. I'm sure we could go on for the rest of the afternoon, but I know you've got to work, and people probably would want to get back to work at some point. But I feel like there's a lot that we could talk about, even with discussions about cyber threats escalating between Russia and Ukraine and the potential U.S. response. So, I just this morning on the news, I heard the name NotPetya for the first time in quite a while, and I wasn't exactly happy to hear that. But maybe that will be potential for discussion in the future if we can invite you back at some point. We certainly are.
Love to.
Awesome.
Love to come back.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, Lexi, for coordinating, and Ryan for supporting. So thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Keep a lookout for upcoming information from ISACA South Florida about future events, including the WOW events, which will be in the late February. So you look out for forthcoming communications about some fantastic speakers that we have, about some forward-looking concepts and artificial intelligence, blockchain and cryptocurrency, as well as the future of work and distributed and digital nomads. Interesting discussions coming up in February. And then just to Ed's point earlier, we are going to be talking about the CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, in March. So great and timely discussions. Thank you very much, Ed. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Lexi. And have a great afternoon, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Take care.